Hello and welcome to another episode of the Testing Peers podcast. My name is Chris Armstrong, and today we're going to be speaking about storytelling, which is a key theme in our lives as testers. Tonight, joining me, we have Russell Craxford.
Hello.
David Maynard.
Hello.
And returning host Samuel Nietzsche.
Hey, everybody.
Before we dive into any exciting banter from Russell Craxford, we will have our sponsor message from our sponsors, Enfocus. Enfocus are a UK-based software testing company. They've been supporting businesses for 24 years by providing services that include burst resource, accelerated test automation, performance testing, and fully managed testing services. In 2021, they launched a test automation academy to create amazing testers, and they've now created jobs for 48 people in our industry in just under 3 years. Well done, Enfocus. Thank you for that. Now, if you want to find any more information, you can go and visit their website at www.enfocus.co.uk and email them info@enfocus.co.uk, and there'll be more information in the show notes. Mr. Banter Claus, Russell Craxford, over to you.
You're going to have to keep me honest, guys, because I'm not sure if we've done this one or not before, but because it's the sort of thing I would do. So we'll find out. So I'm wondering, right, I was working on my car at the weekend, so I was going to ask you the question, favourite cars. Do you have a favourite car? And if so, what would it be? If you had a dream car, if Testing Peers made you a billionaire, what car would you buy?
Lots of practicality questions to ask, but if I didn't have to worry about practicality...
You've got £1 billion, so you can buy many cars.
As a child, the car I was most obsessed with would be the late 80s Porsche 911 Turbo. I had about 6 small die-cast models of that car, and it was something that I was slightly obsessed with. I saw a few in real life, and for some reason they seemed less exciting to me than the tiny die-cast cars, but I still believe I'd like to drive one of those and experience what that's like.
It's difficult to name just one. Obviously, classic 80s film Back to the Future, I'd love a DeLorean. But more practically, I would probably, since money was no object and I could keep it running, probably a real classic Mini, an old style Mini. That would probably be.
Would you modernise it in any way, or would you just keep it as raw, like out of the factory?
I'd try and keep it as original as possible. Obviously keep it up to date, as in able to be driven. But yes, I don't think I'm not a pimper, as it were.
Something I never thought to call you, I have to be honest, David.
I guess my favorite car would have 4 wheels or maybe 5, one to steer it. So I'm a person who totally doesn't like cars. They have to be practical. So
nothing wrong with practical cars?
Well, 4 to 5 wheels, definitely. And enough space to load things that are necessary, like kids, dog, maybe some suitcases or stuff like that. Or maybe it would be a kind of mobile home. So because that's very practical if you want to drive around. But that's like the categories that are important for me when it comes to a car.
Makes sense. And to be honest with you, I like the idea of a camper van type thing. I think that's definitely a cool one. Me, this is why I think I must have said this by now. Mine's a AC Cobra original, Shelby Cobra. Money no object type situation. Money is an object. That's unfortunately real life though, isn't it? But down to earth. But yeah, if I was going practical, sensible, I probably would go the camper van route with you. I think that'd be quite cool because you can combine it for the holidays and do all sorts of different things with it.
They're very in vogue at the moment, camper vans. Lots of people are getting them.
Well, that's because we, like them, are clever.
Absolutely.
Anyway, today's topic, should we move across onto that? Should we segue? Should we use our king of segues to help us segue?
I was pointing to David, he wasn't doing it. Segways are a wonderful form of transport. So let's transport ourselves from the banter to the topic. Oh, what a mighty fine story that was. Anyway, storytelling. It's an important part of our jobs as testers. We have to tell compelling stories. We have to advocate on behalf of customers. We have to give presentations. Some of us are mad enough to go up on stage and give talks. We need to tell compelling stories in our bug writing, in our documentation to try and really bring quality narratives to life and many more things. The reason we dived into this originally, listener, was because we have Sam here, and Sam managed to tell a rather impressive story at Agile Testing Days through the medium of musical, which, by the way, was absolutely awesome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm not sure. Should we talk about the story, how this came to life, or the story of the musical? Because these are pretty different things.
Both are valid to do. I mean, the story of the musical, for those who haven't listened, might be quite interesting, and then maybe how you decided to achieve that could be quite interesting.
So the goal was really to implement drama, to entertain people and give them something that hits home in some way. And I think that is one of the ingredients of every good story. People should feel like they are included, so they should have some familiarity. And therefore, the musical was based around a group of testers or a team of testers who should be replaced by a new AI. That's a monster that is not unknown to a lot of us. And so that was the main story point. And as it goes with science fiction and drama, usually the AI develops a conscience, and it's not a very nice AI in the end. It turns out that in the end, it's the AI versus humanity. Only one can stay, and only one can be relevant after that event. That's the story in short.
So how was it you came to tell a story like that via musical in a testing conference format?
That's a funny question. Why not? No, this has not been done before, probably. And my friend Lena and me found out that singing on stage is something that we really, really enjoy a year before. And then it was just a question, okay, how can we prolong this? How can we build upon this? And then it was, oh, we sang together. Why don't we sing with 7 people next year? That's the story. How the idea was born, really.
I think it's interesting you're saying about your storytelling. I think the important thing about anything to do with storytelling, as you say, is making it relevant to people. You allow people to immerse themselves into that and recognize what's the references or the similarities to what's happening in their own lives. And that's one of the most fundamental factors. And you can take people on realms of fantasy and things, but as long as they're invested in it and they understand it, and that's so important with storytelling, whether it's the bug report, whatever, it's making it relevant to whoever the audience is, be it a developer, be it a project manager, be it the customer itself, with user stories and things like that. It's making sure that it is relevant and valid for that particular scenario. And I think probably another good thing about the musical is that it's also memorable. People are talking about it. People will recognize it for what it is. And also it's also helpful being the first as well, because, others will be measured by your greatness. That's a really important factor as well, is being first. And I think it was a fantastic opportunity for you. And I think you really aced it, as it were.
Compared to our greatness or to our craziness, because in the end, it really turned out to be a lot naivety and a lot of craziness. I mean, doing this as a remote side project with people all over the world, yeah, no serious director would have done that, I guess. So that's also part of the truth.
Bravery and innovation and experimentation, though, of course, are key parts. And if you don't do those things, you don't get feedback. These are all sorts of important things. They're pushing boundaries. It's really exciting when you see a new format of storytelling, given people often, I don't know if you see folks start talking about a topic or a subject and you think, same old. I already know the story. You're not going to get that when a format's completely new and completely interesting, and standing out can be really interesting. But the way it can be received, I suppose, could be very different for some people. A change in format can be quite jarring. You are like in a very safe space, obviously, in Agile Testing Days, that in that community. But I think David's right when he's talking about gauging the audience with whom you're going to be presenting, understanding what they want, what they need, how you can tell a story, making assumptions about what they already have in terms of context. It's quite a broad thing, but yeah, I mean, I've watched the musical. It was very exciting. It was a fun way to tell a story, but have we got sort of maybe tales of iterating, learning, trying to tell stories where maybe we haven't got things right and we've had to sort of pick things apart, start again, learn, change in the workplace?
I guess context is king, really. It depends a lot on what do I want to get across and who is the audience. And those two things impact so much. I was thinking about storytelling earlier today. It's so different because I also tell a story when I write code, but I do it completely differently. Because, for example, I don't want my code to be exciting. I want my code to be boring. But if I want to tell a good story, I need to be exciting because otherwise I will lose attention. So it depends so much on the goal that you have. Is it documenting something? Is it getting people's attention? Is it getting one special point across? And in that case, I would say, for example, if you only take one thing from this talk, then let it be SQL is awesome. For example, I'm pretty sure after this podcast episode, a lot of people will remember, oh, SQL is awesome, even if I probably don't know what is SQL. So we are allowed to cheat if we want to have a certain point across. We are allowed to tell that, hey, this is my main point.
I can remember a fail I was involved with as an audience member, which was a talk that was really engaging, really fun, got everyone kind of laughing, engaged with it, and all the rest of it. It was very interesting. It talked about this, may not make this adult rated, by the way, but never mind. It talked about dildos and how they helped with software. That bit I remember. What the story, the rest of it was, no idea. So sometimes you can have such a good hook that's so different in a conference that you actually forget the point of the message. And that's sometimes where you got your storytelling wrong.
Probably isn't actually a success then, is it? If you're remembered for something, but not.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. It's learning
not the
something
key.
from. So I remember the great talk about a dildo, but unfortunately I can't remember what the talk was about or what I should have taken away from it, other than they were talking about sex toys. So I would argue that was storytelling that got a good hook, but completely missed the point because it was so good. It actually, for the days after, people remember it, but actually in the weeks go by, it just fades back into your memory as that one about the sex toy.
It feels a bit like how you can have meetings that generally feel like you're being productive, but then when you kind of come out of it and go, well, what have we achieved? You're like, hmm.
Do a lot of those meetings.
I was listening to a podcast called The Rest is Entertainment Day, and they were talking about Dan Brown's new book launch that's coming. And one of the hosts, Marina Hyde, said the thing that she finds really irritating about Dan Brown is that his writing is actually not very good. And she said, she said that there was something that she'd say, like, she thinks he's a bad writer, but she thinks he's a brilliant storyteller. And she said it's possible to have a complete divergence in an interesting way, that you can sort of have one without the other. The point I'm trying to get out beyond just a lovely anecdote about Dan Brown is that we can sometimes get caught up in the wrong detail when we're telling a story. So perhaps we fuss too much about some presentation slides. Perhaps we fuss too much about having something really interesting to the point where people don't remember the point of the talk, or that you spend such a long time on stuff that you've lost the main part, when in reality the value that comes from a story, like you say, is telling a story that's compelling, that people can't leave, that people are invested in. When I see presenters who are passionate and interesting and stuff, I couldn't care less what's on their slides, particularly because I'm listening to them. Now, sometimes slides can be a brilliant storytelling device, and I'm not saying that having slides is a bad thing in any way, shape, or form. But it's the way they do it. Sometimes people have got these amazing dolls with strange voices that speak on the slide with them also. It's the way that you do it. I think we can often get ourselves to the point where we fixate on something to the point where we've lost the point. And that's where I think perhaps having a rubber duck, someone to help review our work, can be really useful, because I think it's very easy to get stuck in our own little echo chambers and spiral sometimes a little bit.
I think you're right. I think that what I've found sometimes, especially with the writing sort of bug reports and things. And also it depends on the medium. I'll get onto that in a second. But writing bug reports, sometimes we find this bug and we write it all down. And there have been times when I then come back the next day and go, what was this rubbish that I wrote? It seemed so clear when I was there in the moment, but there was so much nuances and details and things that and assumptions that I hadn't put down. And so therefore I had to then rewrite it because in the cold light of day, I realized that particular thing. And I think that you also highlighted an interesting point as well, Chris. It depends on the medium in which you give it. A conference speech, I've seen some conference speeches where actually you are listening to their every word. They are such a good storyteller. You don't need the slides. The slides were pictures because you were just engaged in what they were actually saying.
He's been to one of your talks, Chris.
There's no hash of mine. It's all glory.
But you need to be incredibly good in order to do that. Some people need the crutch of the PowerPoint presentation or whatever and the words. But again, don't cloud that with too many words because also they should be listening to what you're saying. And I think that this is why, for me, the podcast works well for my messaging because I don't have to rely on the written word. I don't have to rely on a presentation. Actually, people listening is a really good thing. And that's why we're up to 120 episodes of the podcast because it works.
That no one ever sponsored us to stop. I think we did give that option on Patreon, if I remember correctly. Storytelling is one of those things, as you say, it's context and bug reports, trying to sell an idea, trying to get buy-in, engagement. There's lots of different avenues which is relevant to us as testers because it influences and persuades is often the case. You're trying to connect with your audience to give something more reasonable that they can understand sometimes so that actually they can relate to you or you can relate to them so that you can actually use that as a mechanism to persuade them towards an outcome, a purpose, a point, a value. We talked storytelling a lot. And one thing that just leaped to my mind was kind of like the Phoenix Project and books of that ilk that actually sets, it's quite, that's a long story in relation to a lot of storytelling we do, but it sets a scene and walks through an example. You buy into the problem, you engage with that problem, and then actually the almost the solution becomes a no-brainer to a degree. And people actually buy into that and then suddenly they're on board. And if you get a lot of people to read that book as an example, you can see a change in attitude to thinking of the whole system versus localization and trying to fix little problems in little areas, but think about the actual whole team goal. And it's interesting how if you can sell the right story in the right way, how you can help people go on a journey of discovery of knowledge from a bug report to understand why it matters, because often that's one of the hardest things to sell with bugs. You found a problem, no one disputes that, but why does it matter? But so you can take people on that journey with you through a short, rambling way, verbally written book. You can actually get a lot of buy-in to your concept, your idea, your problem. And again, as I said, tailor it to your audience. If you gave someone a book on every bug report, I'm fairly certain no one's going to read them. If you're trying to change the way in which an organization does testing, then actually a book or a story of length might actually be a way. A play might be an interesting way of actually tackling that problem. A musical or anything of that ilk might be a way to tackle that problem because actually you can get people engaged with the thing. They buy into that whole thing. They're in the moment. And then you take them on that journey from the moment to the middle to kind of what's going on, what's needed, and then to the end, to the outcome, to resolution, to a solution, to, in lots of stories, a catastrophe, a failure that happens that could have been prevented, or the saving of a problem, someone stepping in to save the day. So it's interesting how that length, the types, adapts to the situation that you're trying to do, I think. That's a good book, by the way, for those who haven't read.
I would like to come back to one detail both Chris and David mentioned, which is concentrating on your message and your purpose. I think that is pretty well done with most of the lengthy stories that you mentioned, Russell. But I think we could do so much better if we made intentional decisions what our main point is with the little stories. So, for example, bug reports, or for example, if I want to persuade someone of some idea, if we take just a couple of minutes to get clear, what is my intention, what is my goal, and this is the hardest part and also the most painful when I'm preparing talks, does this detail that I want to add actually support that main purpose or not? And if it doesn't support the main purpose, then throw it away. Oh, kill your darlings. That's pretty rough, to be honest.
There's a whole thing, isn't there, as well, about this meeting could have been an email, or this thing could have been formatted differently, this could have been sliced up, or this could have been elaborated upon. Like, people feel very irritated when they receive a message that isn't in a format that they appreciate. And there is appropriateness that we can get wrong. I've worked in places where they added 52 different fields for you to populate on a Jira bug ticket because somebody came up with something they thought was important for us to add on that ticket. I guarantee you nobody needed 52 fields being populated for that bug ticket. But there's like people not saying no, people are not refining, not making changes along those lines. And it can be sometimes quite scary to challenge established things in organizations, maybe death by PowerPoint or other sorts of things like that. But where we are blessed to have a voice, I think we might have an opportunity to listen to people and make changes to how those stories are told. And we talk about quality narratives within our organizations. How is that story of quality told through our organizations? And if we have got dysfunction, people who are disassociating and turning off, or if there are toxic traits, how are we addressing those things? How are we celebrating good things happening? How are we empowering people to have a voice? All of these things are really important, and process to establish that probably starts with people rather than any other thing, and understanding what makes people tick or ticks people off. What are our goals? What are our desires? How are we going to be able to reach those things as a company? Context, as you mentioned, Sam, is absolutely king with these things. There's not a one and done way of doing these things, but I think where there's shared intent, shared focus, shared value, there's an opportunity for that to spread throughout an organization with intent, and perhaps our roles in companies can be to be that sort of cheerleader without having to be the one that's doing all of that work as well. My gosh, I hope it's not just me.
I was going to pick up on something that Samuel said about sort of influencing, and one of the key things I remember about storytelling is that highlight the problem. If you're trying to influence someone to pass with money for a project or whatever, or a customer, highlight what it means to them. What value are you adding to them? So therefore, again, it gives them absolute buy-in to understand where you're coming from, because the last thing you want is to come up with this fantastic idea and for them to come, spend 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour listening to your story and then go, what is in it for me? Whereas actually, if you're upfront from the start, then they can get buy-in. They may well have questions initially, which may then can then tailor your presentation or whatever, your storytelling, in order to even finesse it whilst you're giving it, in order to help them get to that particular problem or highlight that particular problem. But make sure that you start early on in that particular respect. I was also going to ask, we've talked about storytelling. How can we encourage people or improve people's storytelling to allow them to be a success in the storytelling? Because it doesn't come naturally to everybody.
I need to think of one thing immediately when it comes to how do we get people involved in this. You can tell them. So actually, example from the musical. Firle is also well known to the community and was also part of the musical. And Firle is an amazing storyteller. And I think sometimes she forgets that she is. One thing that I did as a director of the musical was I saw the spots. For example, the story of the unfinished fable of the sparrow and the owl, which was like a main thing in the musical. I immediately saw, okay, this is Firle's part, and she wouldn't have picked it up by herself. But I said, hey, Firle, you can do this. This is perfect, and she delivered it perfectly. So sometimes that's the message in the story. Sometimes it takes a nudge, or just, hey, you can do this, and you will be amazing. And then it's just cheering up, and then you have encouraged and created a new storyteller.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And you've highlighted or ignited an idea in my head, is also give them the sort of safe spaces for them to craft their storytelling. So again, it's that sort of critical friend of giving them an audience, but they're a supportive audience, rather than going straight out and trying to do it on the really big stage. If they don't have a lot of confidence, allowing them to sort of start within the smaller, more intimate, but much more supportive areas. in order to get their confidence up.
Not all storytelling has to be audible
Mhm.
as well. Like, there's
No, it
we all
doesn't.
have different ways to tell our stories and be participant in those stories and being various different actors. Not everyone has to have main character energy, much as I've watched too much American TV where everyone seems to have main character energy. It's actually quite nice to have a balance of storytellers who are loud, charismatic, invested in a particular thing. We've got T-shapes, you've got cone shapes, you've got people who are down in the weeds, people who are sort of holistic thinkers. And I think the best stories are the ones that can weave all these different elements together in something that's coherent and hopefully compelling and like you say, involving of other people. And just sort of to the point of how do you bring that out of people, give them space, understand what motivates them, what interests them, what they are interested in, what they're good at doing, and help people. Not everyone's going to want to be put into that position, but giving space and opportunity to people is definitely a really good way.
Yeah.
And believe in them.
Believe in them. Practice. It's a lot of what we just talked about, but it's giving people the idea to hone their skill and giving them supportive, constructive feedback of what's working, what doesn't work, and explaining the fact that you are one perspective, not the entire audience when you give feedback. Feedback is it's a luxury, really, rather than a right. We've got to give it and to help people grow because it could be that the middle of the story is a bit weak. It didn't grab you as a person, be it verbally, be it presentation, whatever it is, that you got lost in the story. And that feedback can be useful, but you are just one snapshot. Like on this call, on this podcast, was four of us. We could hear the same story and it might hit two of us, and two of us might go over our heads or different direction. So to figure out who your audience is and just keep people grounded, I guess, but give them time to practice and give them feedback on that practice, give them that spaces to fail, to learn, for want of a better word, and accept the fact that not all stories will work. You will not have a 100% success rate. That is not the goal. The goal is to practice, to try and seek out a way to express yourself that has results. See what works for you. As Chris says, Chris used Dan Brown as an example. He's not a good writer, but got great stories. They turned into movies that made lots of money. He did quite well for being a bad writer. You don't have to be great at everything to be successful, I guess is the point there. And that actually, you might not be great at writing the story. Maybe you're great at verbalizing the story. Maybe you're great at doing a video of the story, podcasting the story, blogging about the story. Set it in a story sense, and you'll get more people to go along the journey, especially within, well, humans aren't manuals. We don't like reading manuals unless we're trying to follow a task. So if you're trying to sell ideas, storytelling is probably the best way to sell an idea, a concept, or a thing. But if you want someone to follow a step by step, then it's not storytelling you need. It's a manual.
I think it's really interesting you saying about feedback. I think that feedback is really important. And I was going to also pick up on Chris's point, and Russell mentioned it as well, is find your own way of doing your storytelling. As we said, presentations are one thing, but it could be written. In terms of feedback, don't try and change their narrative of storytelling or type of storytelling or the way that they've decided to do it. Concentrate on the message that they're giving rather than the mechanism that they've chosen. Not everyone wants to do it the same way, and we should embrace change. As I always say, culture add, not culture fit. It's the idea of adding to what it is rather than trying to fit people into a box and going, you will do it this way because this is the way that my message is going. That I understand the message. We are an individual, and so the way that we understand our message is very different to the masses, and so therefore we should think about the way they're telling the story and the actual details of the story rather than trying to confine them into a box.
We didn't talk about a specific thing of storytelling, which is surprise.
I did enjoy that, Sam. I was thinking about a practical tip that I've found has helped me in recent times when I've been trying to write more often in a way that hopefully is accessible to a bunch of people, that gets across the story I'm trying to tell, but in a format that historically I've been very casual in my writing style, but sometimes I want to add a bit more structure. And so I quite often I start with a straw man, be it a brainstorm, be it bullet points or something like that. And what I now quite often do is once I've got a base of an idea that I've begun to flesh out, I will now record myself talking about what I mean for each of those points, and then use that transcript to then flesh out what I'm trying to write, to then edit my own stuff out of it, because sometimes my brain sort of worries about small points between like various sentences and lines and paragraphs in a bulleted list. But if I can articulate what I'm trying to say audibly as I'm looking at my sort of walking and talking through some sort of framework or straw man, suddenly I've got something to build from because I've told a story in a way that I'm comfortable doing and I'm happy presenting it, and then I'm able to then turn that into something written. So for me, as a practical step, that's helped me go from sort of a framework of an idea into a story telling what that framework of an idea is and sort of fleshing that thing out. And that's been something I've really been experimenting a lot with in the last year. And that's largely down to the ability of transcribing what I've been writing down or been saying out loud from a framework into some sort of storytelling device.
Are you telling me AI is actually making life easier for you?
When AI actually hears the words that I'm saying correctly, yes. What it is doing, it's certainly helping me tell a story better. That's an AI tool. Transcription tools do get it very wrong very often, but it's definitely helping me articulate myself in a faster way to still speak in my own voice with my own ideas. But it's that little shortcut where I think I would have that sort of break in my brain and I couldn't quite work out how to bridge that gap.
Really clever point, to be honest, Chris. I hadn't thought about it, but it's a really good idea because I will often have writer block. I seem to also have verbal diarrhea though. So if I could combine the verbal diarrhea with the writer's block, I might get over the writer's block a lot easier.
And on that bombshell, we have run out of time. So thank you very much for sharing your stories with us all. It's been a pleasure spending time with you all. And please do get in touch if you have any ideas about your own storytelling or stories to actually share. You can email us at contact@testingpeers.com. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll welcome you back in a couple of weeks' time.
For now, it's goodbye from the Testing Peers.
Goodbye.